Founded on February 9th, 1797, Youngstown, Ohio would quickly go on to become a very populated and prosperous city. The largest factor in its growth, like so many towns at the time, was the discovery of coal in the area early into the 19th century. With its newfound resource to export, Youngstown needed an efficient method of distribution. So, soon thereafter, in 1835, a canal connecting it to the Lake Erie Canal System began construction, being completed in 1840. Only a decade and a half later, the town would become connected via railway to the rest of the country. And with valuable coal to mine and export, and all of the methods of transportation and distribution that they could hope for, Youngstown had began its golden age. People began to immigrate from all over the world, because while steel mills and coal mines weren't exactly cushy work environments, the jobs paid well enough and were available enough due to high product demand to make them highly sought after by many. Citizens from Wales, Germany, Ireland, and many more locations flocked to Youngstown to try their hand and make a living under the booming industrialization. Sometime later, in 1901, just before the beginning of the Rust Belt's decline, the Republic Rubber Company was chartered. This business, though created with optimism and confidence by its president H.K. Wick and vice president A.E. Adams, in hindsight seemed fated to crumble. By this time, Youngstown's ore deposits were beginning to deplete, and to make matters worse, due to being landlocked, it cost them a lot of money to import ores from other states like Michigan and Minnesota. Meanwhile, Cleveland, Chicago, Detroit, and Buffalo all had direct access to Great Lakes shores, making import less costly for them. Thus, Youngstown was at an inherent disadvantage versus its competitors. However, despite this looming economic decline, Republic Rubber managed to thrive. This is largely due to the high demand for the items that they produced. Though they made a wide array of rubber products, the two most important and influential products were tires and hoses. It's no secret that by the 20th century, the automobile had become a hot commodity that practically flew off of the assembly lines. So, any business that created anything tied to the automobile industry was bound to find success somewhere. The demand for tires was so great, in fact, that in 1907, 5 years after the factory of Republic Rubber was erected on the former grounds of the American Belt Company, a whole new building was added onto the property solely for tire production. This was succeeded by a storage building the following year, as well as a clubhouse and office building not long after that. But see, Republic wasn't just happy creating and selling tires. Sure, their product was flying off of the shelves, and they could have just continued to make tires the way they were. But instead, they decided to revolutionize tires. Around 1915, they'd invented the protium process, which was a method of producing tires that resulted in the rubber wearing much more evenly across the surfaces they were used. This meant the tires could last longer, and the cars that used them would still handle well even as the tires degraded. They had the best tires on the market. They were selling more tires than any of their competitors, and by now the company held a capital of $10 million. They were also exporting their product to all corners of the world. Things were looking up for Republic Rubber. Unfortunately, in 1916, the company would lose its president as H.K. Wick would pass away on the 26th of March. 1 year after Wick's death, the Republic Rubber Corporation was formed, and they immediately followed this decision up by purchasing a second facility from Knight Tire and Rubber Company. For the coming years, business continued to thrive, and they continued to be an industry leader. A large shakeup would occur on June 8, 1923, however, when Republic Rubber Corporation was sold at public auction for $3.5 million to a company called Lee Rubber and Tire Corporation. Now going by Republic Rubber Division of Lee Rubber and Tire, many were unsure about the company's future. But as it had for over 2 decades, the company marched forward into an ever-changing market, and their sales numbers remained stable for the next 40 years. Until that is, the 60s. The 60s posed a huge hurdle for Republic. First off, Youngstown's economy had slowly been eroding over time due to the rising energy costs. Steel mills just weren't making the money that they once had, and as a result, there was less funds that could be put towards importing coal that they needed to produce goods. It was a self-destructing loop, and there was no easy way out. They simply could not compete with the low import cost of their lakeside competitors. The second issue is that Republic's parent company itself was sold out in the 60s to a company called the Aeroquip Corporation. This is likely due to the fact that Lee Tire and Rubber could no longer make a profit, as the operation and energy costs began to outweigh the income that they would receive. From there, Aeroquip would also change hands several times, eventually merging with the Salem Valve Company, who would acquire all of the hose manufacturing lines. At some point, in all of the buyouts and mergers, production of tires would cease entirely in favor of hoses and valves. The outlook would become even more grim for Republic Rubber Company in 1979, as Aeroquip had been forced to close down the Youngstown plant due to the aforementioned energy costs. With over 350 people left unemployed, several former heads of the Youngstown division began to hatch a plan to bring the business back. Their goal was simple: start a new company called the Republic Hose Manufacturing Corporation and ask the government for a $1.5 million grant to buy the original plant back from Aeroquip. However, Aeroquip was unwilling to sell the 15 acres that included the hose assembly lines. In an unexpected move, the city of Youngstown itself would buy the entire plant from Aeroquip, quickly reselling the hose assembly portions back to Republic. Unfortunately, it was a short-lived victory, as just 10 years later, in 1989, Republic would be forced to close up shop entirely, when the crashing economy finally became too great of a burden on their finances. After Republic officially shut down their operations for good, the 48-acre plant was left abandoned, with no further plans to use it. Within 20 years, the buildings would fall victim to the sands of time. The site now serves as a hotspot for urban explorers, as many hobbyists visit the location each year. Pictures and videos from these explorers reveal the sad state the structure is in. Though the exterior remains mostly intact, many portions of the ceiling are caved in or missing entirely, and scrappers have removed anything from the interior that may have at one point held any value. The walls are littered with graffiti, and it's not uncommon to find the less fortunate using the structure as a temporary living space during the winter months. The building will likely never be utilized again, and there aren't any current plans for demolition, so it will remain abandoned, a reminder of Youngstown's former glory and the historic Rust Belt as a whole.